Yeah, we're both here today to tell you a little bit about the Open Climate Campaign. But before we start, I want to set the picture, the landscape. I think we're all really familiar with the idea that open sharing of educational resources, papers, peer-reviewed publications, data is not the default. And if we dig into specifically the peer-reviewed papers, we find that if you take all the papers that are published in the United States, about 41% of papers are open access. If you have a look at papers published by Canadian authors, about 38% of those papers are open. So it really isn't the default. But something changed in 2020. I think we all were affected by a big change in our lives with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the way that we did science was also affected by COVID-19. There was this recognition that something huge was happening at the global scale, something that was likely leaving no one on Earth untouched, whether they were affected by the virus or whether they were affected by the consequences of a virus that was global and so easily spread. There was this recognition that we needed to work on this problem and that all the information and data around this problem needed to be made open. And the community responded. About 77% of COVID-19 related papers are open access. That, of course, that percentage is probably fluctuates because some of those papers were made open just for a short period of time. But really what I'm trying to use that number is to show that in contrast with all other papers, there's something different happening with COVID-19. And what underlies that is the recognition by scientists, policymakers, researchers, the public, publishers, that we needed to make the data and information around COVID-19 open if we were going to help solve or find solutions or find treatments for COVID-19. We saw that about 80,000 preprints were published in preprint repositories since the announcement of the virus. Again, so it was not just peer-reviewed publications, it was like an entirely different way of looking at the way that science was being conducted, sharing data and information not only openly, but also as quickly as possible. There was no time to wait when we were talking about such a large global scale problem. So I think what I want you to take from this is that I think the world recognized that when we have large global scale problems and like COVID-19 and other of world scale large problems, in order to solve them, we need to have the knowledge about them be open. And what more grand challenge that faces us than climate change? So I'll turn it over to Cable for the second half.
Thanks, Monica. So you've heard us at Creative Commons talk for years about the connections, and I'll share a link here to the Sustainable Development Goals and the connections with open education resources that we should share. We should have OER about all of the SDGs. We've recently partnered with the SDG Academy at the United Nations and helped them move all of their curriculum from closed to open. You've heard us talk about the importance of what Monica just talked through, that all of the research should be open. So when we say that the world's, in order to solve the world's biggest problems, the knowledge about them must be open, we're talking about all of those things. We're talking about the research needs to be open, the data sets need to be open, the educational resources need to be open, the cultural artifacts about them need to be open, the books about them need to be open, the hardware needs to be open sourced with open source hardware, software, and then open source hardware licenses, and the software. If any of you are involved with climate change, you'll know that modeling of climate models for what variables we're putting into the atmosphere and how that's going to affect future weather and climate modeling is huge, and it's run by software, and we need that software to be open sourced as well. So when we say knowledge, we mean all of those things collectively. With this campaign, we're certainly focused on research as kind of our primary focus, the research and the research data, and where opportunities present themselves across the campaign goals, we will be looking to open up all of those other parts of knowledge as well. As Monica said, we've taken this general idea about looking at the SDGs and trying to figure out how open can help make significant progress in solving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We've zeroed in on climate and biodiversity preservation. We have worked with multiple funders who have, I'm pleased to say, funded us for a 4-year open climate campaign, which Monica is helping to lead us. So we're absolutely thrilled about this. If you look at the slide, we've detailed here the 11 goals or outcomes that we have in the campaign. So the first one is campaign messaging. 1 minute. I'll do my best. We may sacrifice a little Q&A time. Campaign messaging. Obviously, this is a campaign. We're going to be putting out talking points, 1-pagers, 2-pagers, videos, all the sorts of things that advocates and activists need in order to advance these arguments. So you're going to see those activities coming out: social media, website, et cetera, et cetera. Number 2, where are we now with open access around climate and biodiversity? We're going to engage in bibliometric research to really get very specific about, of all of the climate change research, of all of the biodiversity preservation research, how much is open now, how much is still closed. We need that baseline so that we can see the change over time as we engage in other campaign activities. It's also good, it's good information to have. Third, identify legal and policy barriers. This stuff is hard, right? As Jonathan pointed out, the default is not open on many of these things. And so we need to dig into what are the barriers, come up with solutions and strategies to overcome those barriers, and then implement them, which takes us to numbers 4, 5, and 6. One of our primary campaign strategies is to work with these 3 primary audiences: governments, funders, which more often than not are foundations and other entities which are funding climate and biodiversity research, and environmental organizations, which should be pretty obvious, right? They are on the front lines of educating about, fighting, changing policies about climate and biodiversity. And so we will be engaging with all 3 of these to help them create, adopt, and implement open policies to ensure that all of the knowledge that they are funding, educational resources, research, data sets, et cetera, is open. What we're shooting for is gold standard. We're looking for CC BY on articles, CC 0 on data, and 0 embargo, period. So that's our starting point for all of the research. Number 7, inclusion in international frameworks. There is active creation of new frameworks. The UNESCO recommendation on open science is a good example. And where we identify these frameworks about climate and biodiversity, we will be engaging them and trying to get on writing committees and inserting open access into those new frameworks. And there are several that are active right now. Securing endorsements. So as we work with governments, funders, environmental organizations, and others, we'll be asking them to formally endorse the campaign. We've already had a lot of those discussions, and we will actually be asking them not just to endorse, but to advertise, host webinars, help us get out through their newsletters, et cetera. Number 9, collaborations with traditionally excluded voices in knowledge. Our starting point for this campaign is that the existing research model is fundamentally and structurally inequitable. And so we are not interested in creating new inequitable knowledge models, but rather fighting against those models and creating something better. In that process, we're engaging with a broad global community to make sure that that's done well. Unbinding closed research, opening up key articles which are closed, and then last, special exemptions for climate and biodiversity research. Just like with COVID, we will be engaging both not-for-profit open access journals and commercial journals and saying, in the future, we'd like you to make climate and biodiversity preservation research and other knowledge open by default, even if it conflicts with your business model.